Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 20, Futureproofing Next's Triaging Healthy Portfolios, Balancing Your Roster of Initiatives. And today we'll be talking with Sean Moffett, who is my colleague from Futureproofing Next. We wrote a book called Futureproofing Next, The Future Beyond Innovation. And today it's all about triaging healthy portfolios. We have with us Aid McCormick, who's a corporate strategist, Abhijit Kanguli, who is with Goodyear Ventures, and Ravi Mulugu from UL Ventures. And we'll be featuring them as panelists in this really important topic, which is how do you really build a healthy innovation portfolio? And what we'll do first is Sean and I will set the stage, and then we'll have a bit of one-on-one spotlights with everyone, have a little round the horn, and we'll end with a good conversation. We also would love for you to have any questions because we're really excited that so many people from a global community have joined us today live, as well as lots of people who listen to us after the fact. So feel free to get us your questions, and we are futureproofingnext.com. So here's the way that we're going to set the stage. And this is a topic that is probably one of the most important topics of all of the topics in the future-proofing universe. It's also rife with myths and rife with problems and rife with challenges because there's lots of different opinions, some of which are ill-informed about optimal ways to build a healthy corporate portfolio and how can companies nurture the right combination of initiatives. What are the models that really work best to support impact and what do you measure? And the reason that this is so tough is that we have all been in rooms where there's a lot of great outputs, there's inputs from accelerators or incubators or joint ventures that we've got, or a bunch of startups that are co-creating with a corporation or internally developed corporate initiatives. And at the end of the day, you have to say, well, these all look fantastic. Which one should we fund to move forward? And the question is, a lot of times they're all defensible. So the question is, what does a portfolio look like? What does healthy really mean? What does the right combination of initiatives really mean? And how do you get everybody on the same page? So the first thing we'd like to do is talk a little bit about the number of deals per month. And I'm going to go back and forth with Sean. Looking at something like this, the number of corporate deals that are backed, corporate backed deals by month for the last year. Any thoughts about this? And for the people on podcast world, audio only, you can really see that there has been a lot of shift in terms of whether it's a corporate backed initiative in terms of deal count or something in the future and where that's trending. So Sean, any thoughts on this?
I guess I have two. I think one, I'm really curious to know where the next few quarters go. We're like now living in our, 8th month of the pandemic. And I'm curious to know how companies are looking to reimagine themselves, and are they going to do it through different ventures, or are they going to try to go it alone? And I kind of liken this chart, Andrea, to kind of CEOs come in and sometimes they want to centralize things and sometimes they want to decentralize things. I think corporate venturing also has its own kind of expansionary contraction kind of slope to it. And we're seeing a little bit in this graph. I think we go in like 2 or 3 year waves on this front. What's the best way to go about things? So I don't know if you got thoughts.
Well, my thoughts are that I agree with all of that. And I also think that the way that people assess risk and deal with risk is really different. So, where will our future come from, which is really challenging, and will it come from inside the 4 walls, outside the 4 walls, or should we just buckle down and not even try to worry about new things because we really have to keep growing incrementally? So I'm sure all of these themes will come out. And the next topic that we are interested in is when we look back at sort of the past, and Henry Chesbrough, who's a friend of our community, wrote an article at Harvard Business Review called Making Sense of Corporate Venture Capital in 2002. And of course, there were probably conversations about it a little earlier, but it's interesting because in the old days, there was R&D, there were startups, there was corporate funded research, there was commercialization inside, there were beginnings of incubators, accelerators, but this notion of corporate venture, the idea of, and I would say that some of this is Silicon Valley views of corporate venture is pretty interesting, looking back even from 2002, the ways that shifted. And then you look globally, and this is from a 2016 view of France, and the rise of French corporate venture capital, because hopefully today we'll be looking globally. We want to make sure that that we're not just Silicon Valley centric in this conversation or in the definition of corporate venture. So same thing, back to you, Sean. What are your thoughts about the history and the foundation of this notion of corporate venture?
Yeah, it's funny. I dove down the rabbit hole maybe 3 months ago and looked at the history of corporate venture capital. Probably not great bedside reading, but there is a pretty long history. But if I look at the last 20 years, I think one of the defining differences, Andrew, is just the notion of ecosystems and platforms, right? Like it's no longer just a binary, I invested in somebody. It's more around, I've got a collection of firms that are all trying to be motivated by the same goal and hopefully rallying around it. So I think maybe we'll get into that discussion today.
Well, I agree. And I'll just cite a couple of things. I mean, there is, because of the pandemic, as you mentioned, in many countries, obviously we were talking to some people in Taiwan and the pandemic isn't really front page news there, but in a lot of countries it is. And so clearly people are looking for new ways to be health sensitive, safety sensitive. And so a lot of people are really bullish in terms of building portfolios that acknowledge that. And whether it's, as we're about to do next month in the travel industry, trying to be very health and focused, or whether it's a conversation we had a few months ago with General Motors, where they're saying, hey, we're all in the health business now. You can't get away from it. So there's a lot of interest in certain fields and a lot of cross-industry interest. And then there's also this hope that I'm really trying to be provocative for the panel, because thanks to Aid McCormick, who pointed my attention to this yesterday, a lot of the dynamic, as you mentioned, Sean, in terms of ecosystem, a lot of the dynamic has to do with startups playing well with corporates. And at least in the early stages of my career, there was a lot of distrust there. We always joked that the graphic would be kind of the wolf in sheep's clothing. Trust us, we're the corporates and we're going to help your company grow. And then 5 years later, my favorite phrase is, don't love your startups to death. So Sean, we're going to hear from the panel, but what are your thoughts about this topic?
This reminds me of like arranged marriages, right? Like you don't have to be happy, you just have to maybe make them work, and maybe you'll grow to love each other. But I find the very notion of why an entrepreneur gets into business as a startup kind of can run paradoxical to what a corporation's all about. And so I think there's a little bit of give and take on both sides of this fence. From a somewhat distant view, I find corporates have bad behavior in startups and want to control everything, and startups think they're still startups even though somebody else is funding them quite a bit. So it's a challenging relationship to maneuver.
So we're setting the stage for not us to be the experts, but for our panel to be the experts, clearly. But here, hey, Sean, talk about this dominant strategy lenses, portfolio focus. And once again, for people listening, not seeing, there's a 2x2 matrix that has a lot of categories in the concept of this portfolio focus. So Sean, walk us through this graphic.
Yeah, we did a hefty piece of research last year called the Corporate Innovation Playbook, where we looked at on this slide, and you're right, for our podcast people, it's we're looking at a 2x2 matrix with 8 different lenses in which companies look at their prism of portfolios on. I mean, encouragingly, I think if I look at customer and future, where I guess my bias is, I think most innovations should start from there. They were the first and third ranked kind of lenses at which people were looking at. On the other polls, financial and operations driven, they were 4th and 7th. So I think I expected to see maybe more of a balance there. So I was encouraged to see that more of what people were looking at were definitely not rooted in either the past or present, and definitely rooted more on the customer side of the fence than anything internal. But I don't know, Andrew, you're looking at this fairly fresh. Any
No, I think that it'll be interesting to set the stage for the panelists to think about what these lenses are, because things change. And a lot of times there's a tension between, well, we've got the strategy in place and here's what the board's expecting, versus, something's new and we need to be responsive. So I'll just go to the shameless self-promotion, which is in our book, Futureproofing Next. Sean and I took the time to develop new models. A lot of people use things like business model canvas. We don't disagree that that's a valuable tool, but because we have been so challenged in these conversations with clients and corporations of trying to figure out what are the ways to sort things. And we call it triage because not everything at stage 1 and 2 gets the same treatment, nor should it. You're sitting in an emergency room, somebody has a broken leg, you don't send them to a cardiologist. So what do you do to accelerate and improve the performance in the future? And what do you do to develop something that's, quote, balanced so that you're able to look back 5 years later and go, that was really the right set of priorities. So without, especially for people with podcasts, the shameless promotion of this is, and if you have any questions, by the way, go into chat and Sean will be capturing that. So the shameless promotion is that we have a tool that we've created from looking at 200 plus companies and how they do this triage. And so we have a place to guide you in the book, and the book has this tool in it. So that's our shameless self-promotion. And with that, I'd like to bring our first panelist on. This is Abhijit Ganguly, who is with Goodyear Ventures. And I would like to read his bio first, which is, he leads Goodyear Ventures, which fuels the future of mobility by partnering and investing in seed to growth stage startups in emerging mobility technology. And in the past, Abhijit led Goodyear's incubation and deployment functions, focusing on testing and supporting the scaling of IoT-enabled solutions businesses. Before joining Goodyear, he was responsible for driving growth initiatives in West Africa and Canada for a manufacturing company. And he has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Jadavpur University in India and an MBA from Dartmouth. He's co-authored 2 articles on business model innovation and is the winner of the 2015 Maurice Holland Award for his contribution to the field of business model innovation. And by the way, attended the workshop with you, Abhijit. That's how I met you, was super impressed. And you were the person that really understood how to put experiments and into the mix in a really knowledgeable way. So first of all, welcome. What do you think so far? What do you respond? What did you take notes on from the opening conversation, Abhijit?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the panel. It's great to be here. So yeah, I was really intrigued about some of the commentary on corporate venture and its history and where it's going. I do think that a lot has changed, especially as I look at ours. We started it fairly recently, but we wanted to learn from the best. So we actually have worked with experienced VCs from San Francisco to understand some of the best practices before we dived into corporate ventures. But the goal there being to not make the same mistakes that corporations have made historically with startups. That kind of broke my attention for sure. Great to be here and happy to share thoughts and learn from the others on the panel.
Great. Well, let me ask the first question about that. So what are the differences between, say, a Silicon Valley VC and the way a corporation should think about this concept of a portfolio?
Yeah, so I think we have to probably step back and ask ourselves, why corporate venture? I work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. I think a lot of us are aware, Goodyear is a company which is in the business of manufacturing, distributing, and marketing tire and tire-related products and services. We also have a healthy services footprint, which allows us to help our customers, with the vital services. And we are multi-vertical. We make tires for airplanes. We make tires for commercial trucks. We make tires for passenger cars. So you name it, we are there. So we're also fairly global. So for a company like Goodyear, why do corporate venture? I think is kind of where the answer to your question lies. I think as we have seen over the last 10 years, the pace of change in the automotive industry, especially, has dramatically accelerated. In fact, the last car I bought, the car salesman was talking to me about all the digital connectivity and other aspects of the car, not about the engine, the brakes, the horsepower, etc. So just the way you buy cars nowadays has changed. So, and it reflects a little bit on the changes that the industry is experiencing. And I think there is an acknowledgement that as much as we have so much resources and R&D horsepower inside corporations, it is very practically impossible to boil the ocean and look at every corner of where we need to look into. So we know that there are very talented startups that are going out there and working to understand the new markets, the new technologies. And therein lies the need for a corporate venture function. So our fund is set up to explore markets that we cannot ourselves be in today, but are deeply relevant for our future. And we want to learn about those markets as they evolve. And secondarily, but just as importantly, we also want to understand what technologies of the future are going to be relevant to us. And if we don't want to build them ourselves, or we can't build them ourselves, can corporate venture be a way for us to learn about those technologies? And the answer is obviously yes. So that's a little bit of where we are with respect to why set up corporate venture in Goodyear. Corporate venture is not the answer for every problem. And so I think what we have, and you mentioned that as a part of my past roles inside Goodyear, we have a portfolio of what I call them tools, right? And we take out a certain tool in a certain situation. So we have internal programs, we have venturing, we have incubators, and we also have an external sciences and technology program. So I see all of these things together as a modern day CTO's kind of toolkit, which he or she pulls out at the appropriate level to deal with the problem at hand. So that's a little bit of my thoughts on your comments.
So I have a question of chicken and egg. So in your experience, is it mostly that you know that you need to head in a new direction, and therefore, I'll just use like corporate sustainability goals or something comes up on the strategic horizon or a strategic conversation within the company, and then you go out to look for things that might address that opportunity? Or is it, wow, there's a new technology and we have to figure out how to use that particular raw science and apply it to something that could be commercializable? Is it your partners? I mean, what's the impetus in terms of chicken and egg? Like what starts the, gosh, we need to do something, and then where do you go after that?
Yeah, I think, an organization that is looking outside of its walls to understand the signals is going to find the impetus to be coming from there. So as I look at my automotive industry, where I am today, and I look outside my walls, what do I see? I see dramatic changes coming. I see electric vehicles coming along, and I ask myself, what kind of evolutions do I need for my product, the tire, and my services? Because an EV is serviced very differently than an IC engine car. So how do I evolve my products and services to this emerging trend? So again, it's a matter of listening to signals and responding accordingly. I gave you an example of electric vehicles. Another handy example is also about autonomous vehicles. When you take the driver out of a vehicle, and we can debate on when it's happening, etc., but we do know that in the Sunbelt, there are trucks that are being driven autonomously. There are passenger cars. We know the announcements that have come through in the last few days from Waymo and others in the space. So we know it's happening, or happening in some specific formats. And it is going to, again, pose the same question. How do we change our products and services? What do we need to do differently to address those emerging trends? Also, passenger car ownership, and this is a little bit pre-COVID, but even after COVID, I think it is deeply relevant. People are transitioning from where they wanted to own cars to where they are kind of getting mobility as an amenity. So you're seeing rise of this fleet mindset. So an individual who buys cars or tires or parts, etc., has a different mindset than a fleet manager who is managing a fleet of cars or a fleet of trucks. So how do we handle that changed motivation towards how they buy? What are their motivations, etc.? So I guess in short, if we are looking outside our walls and looking for signals and interpreting them correctly, I think therein lies the impetus of doing things, or having to do things differently, or having to consider more than what we have done so far.
That's great. And we're going to do another round in a minute. I have one last question for this round. Another round where you give us a sort of specific, I call it a war story of, once upon a time there was a moment when. So we'll do that in a minute. But I have one last question, because we did try to create trick questions. How would you define healthy in terms of a healthy portfolio? What's the right mix of balance, risk, innovation, outside the four walls, outside the current mindset, service, product? I mean, if we did multivariate analysis on this, it would probably challenge the best of us to figure out what category we should even be thinking of. So what do you view as healthy? What are, like, what's one way that you are like, yeah, we're in pretty good shape?
So typically, if I am analyzing the spend of an R&D organization or an innovation organization at the level of the CTO or the leader who manages that organization, I would say a healthy organization looks somewhat where the spend is divided in a proportion that's appropriate for the context of your organization. But the spend has a clear delineation between managing the present and experimenting into the future. Managing the present is all about, customers today, competitors today, what my product or my services need to look, how do they stay best in class, the faster, better, more value added, to the right customers at the right time, at the right cost, etc. All of that is very important and has to be paid attention to. So if I look at a CTO's kind of portfolio of where the money is spent, there has to be a focus there because that's important. But also separately, there needs to be a focus on placing strategic bets or making strategic experiments on topics that are getting important to your organization based on these signals that you're sensing from the outside. So in short, if I analyze the spend of an innovation organization or an R&D organization, if I see that there are clear bets that are being made in both buckets of managing the present and also experimenting around in the future, and making strategic bets around the future, I think that indicates that this organization is thinking and acting and putting its bets in a couple different places where they need to be. In short,
Great.
that would be my proxy.
That's great. And what I'll do is, we'll come back for a war story in just a moment. So that's really interesting. And it certainly sets the stage for the next conversation, where we'll be bringing on now. I'll introduce Sean, but first I'll introduce Aid McCormick, who is a former technologist and today is focused on leadership and creating super resilient organizations. He's worked around in 40 countries across many sectors. He's lectured at MIT Sloan School of Management on digital leadership and currently works with Cambridge University on their executive education programs. He's former FT and CIO columnist. He is also the founder of Disruption Readiness Institute. And you can find his perspectives on business and society at aidmccormick.com, and hopefully you will be in touch with him after this conversation. So let me turn it over to Sean Moffett to talk with Aid.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this, Aid, because I was looking through your entire illustrious history here. You're a bit of a renaissance man when it comes to the space, so I'm not too sure what's going to come out of your mouth, but I know it's going to have at least a scope, a general lens on what's going on here. I'm going to jump to the number 2 thing, if we could, on here, and Andrew had said, we're going to emphasize the bolded questions. Well, they're all equally bolded here, so we'll see which ones you snap to. But I was going to say, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and a lot of my discussions with business people are all rooted in that. When we think about this current discussion around, corporate innovation and portfolios, has anything fundamentally changed in terms of how we lead these portfolios now? Like, have you seen anything over the last 7 or 8 months that says our timelines have got shorter, or what we're looking at is different? Or maybe we start there, Ed.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on the show, so to speak. Delighted to be here. I think we've all seen the, if you like, the digital tsunami that's been coming for quite some time. Some of us have faced disruption in terms of, I guess, career-ending automation or defunct business models. But COVID has literally made us all feel disruption. But the reality is that those are just 2 things. That's technology and biology. And you may hear of pest analysis with political, economic, social, as well as technology. You may hear of PESTLE, including legal and environmental. But there's also kind of pestilence as well, where innovation is a force that's raising the bar for everybody. The war for natural resources, the war for cognition, also known as talent. These are all forces that are piling upon each other to create complexity that we have never seen before. And the whole industrial era model that we've been running for the last 300 years has been based upon synthetic certainty. We've been living in an uncertain world up until the industrial era. We managed to tame nature and various other things in order to be able to invest in factories, know that they would be able to provide services long enough to get a return on investment. And that ticked along quite nicely. But now we have the kind of four horsemen of the apocalypse hitting us now. So we're saying goodbye to synthetic certainty and hello to hyper uncertainty. So what this means in practice is the future is unknowable. None of us know what we'll be doing in 6 weeks or 6 months' time. Now, what does this do to a business? It means that strategy is dead. You know, as philosopher Mike Tyson pointed out, the plan goes out the window after the first punch, so to speak. And the fighter pilot who plans their maneuvers before going up into the air for a dogfight won't be in many dogfights. So we're in a post-strategy world. So what does that mean in practice? It means that situational awareness is everything. And listening to those signals in the marketplace and responding in real time, don't worry about tomorrow, let's just get through today, is really what it's all about. And that means that for me, corporate venture capital is not a division of the organization. The organization is a venture capital organization. The organization itself is a portfolio of bets. Yes, one of the bets is quite big. That's the primary business. But we don't know whether that business is going to get taken out next week or in 60 years by a change in consumer sentiment or some scandal. So if you've only got one egg in one basket, you are at risk. So again, the business of being in business in the post-industrial era is being in the business of creating new business models. And that means that every company is going to be a venture capital company. And what I think this will pan out as is that it will be the death of venture capital in the kind of venture capital company sense. And to some extent, I think that's no bad thing, because what those companies do, they sometimes get themselves into a bit of a war in terms of bets. You know, Lyft versus Uber is a prime example. So what they're doing is they're propping up business models that shouldn't exist. You know, if they were animals on the savannah, you know, and you took away that protection, they'd be dead within minutes. And they're actually taking money away from more worthy organizations. So that's kind of broken.
You think that's that's where we're headed to in terms of it? Because I do have a point of view that, you know, we tend to laud the sole entrepreneur with that one singular idea that is going to champion to success. I mean, the movies are made of these type of people, and yet, for my money, I think, you know, being in corporate innovation is actually where some of the more sophisticated kind of decisions have to be made. Is your sense that we are swinging back to less Zuckerbergs of the world and more kind of, you know, the Reid Hoffmans, the whatever the world, that actually have to make some choices within a much larger entity?
Well, I think, I mean, there's a whole kind of John Wayne type of investing, the kind of the blitz scaling and so on. It's just, let's see who can, throw money the longest, so to speak. And to some extent, that's a sort of that whole blitz scaling thing is a bit of a kind of revisionist history and putting some logic into what was a random series of events where some organizations did very well, but lots didn't. I was speaking to the head of investments in a major UK bank last week, and we were talking about, well, how do you judge the whether you invest in a company A or company B? And typically you would look at their business plan. But their business plan is literally a work of fiction before they hit the save button. So where do you go in a world where the plan is just, it's decoration, so to speak? And one of the things, and I may be helping this bank in terms of how it evaluates investments going forward or lending, is companies need to be data-driven, that's for sure. And I know it didn't rank number one on your list, but it's up there. So if there's no sort of data leadership representation in the senior leadership team, that's a red flag. And similarly, if there's no people representation, like a HR director, but a more modern day one, that's a red flag. Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that we're moving towards increasingly digital and automation, the banks, for example, are in a race to the bottom in terms of creating technology factories. They will be 100% efficient, but they'll be operating at approximately 0% margin because all the banks will be doing it. They'll eventually conclude, how do we move back up the value stack again? And they'll start introducing people. But these people won't be, if you like, corporate compliant cogs in the machine. these people will be like Salvador Dali, Lady Gaga, Pablo Picasso, brilliant at what they do, but a little bit of a HR nightmare. So that actually redefines what talent means in the digital age, in the sense that you have to be able to do something that an algorithm or a robot cannot do. And algorithms and robots don't do innovation very well at this point. So your differentiator in the marketplace is the access you have to cognitive capital. The game, the number one rule or the number one job of the CEO is to find the best people, keep them, and remove the obstacles to enable them to do great work with other great people.
I'm going to go back to, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to do the round the horn thing at the end. But I'm going to go back to what you had mentioned in the answer to my first question. You had mentioned that, the world is in permanent uncertainty. I think VUCA is a term that people threw out there liberally. I think we sometimes recoil at it because it seems like it's just kind of something people throw at a meaning to sound smart. But I'll invalidate maybe our whole topic here if you agree with me. So much uncertainty, we can't plan out 6 months to a year ahead of time. Does the whole notion of having a strategy and a corporate portfolio go out the window because you can never get in front of it? And I'm guessing you might have some salvo for somebody that's interested in doing portfolios for the future, but we'll see.
And it's controversial to actually say that strategy is dead. And, we obviously have to think how we're going to do something, but it's less like we need to build a few pyramids, and it's more like we need to get out of this jungle alive, so to speak. So what I'm saying is we're moving towards a more, if you like, situationally aware, data-driven, human-centric model, which actually takes us away from the arthritic factory to a living, sensing organism that's always on the lookout for signals of opportunity and threat. I do a lot of advisory work for organizations across different sectors, and I get sucked in as the digital tsunami starts to approach that sector. And my number one problem is that they see transformation, but they're actually thinking digitalization. So they say, throw AI, blockchain, etc. at my business, and we'll be good. But a smarter, faster, cheaper Titanic at the end of the day is still a Titanic. So a lot of CEOs don't get the need to be to move radically away from where they currently are. But to come back to your question, I think of innovation as a 3x3x3 matrix, like a Rubik cube. And one axis is disruptability. Is this innovation not particularly disruptive, or it's going to disrupt the whole market? From a technology perspective, is it mainstream? Is it emerging? Is it over the horizon? And then the third axis is it in our market? Is it in an adjacent market, or is it in a non-adjacent market? And a lot of innovation activity, and people are feeling smug about this, is in the bottom left-hand corner front of the Rubik cube, when they need to have a sprinkle across all of them. So yes, you do need to have a kind of a portfolio decision-making process. And these are kind of, any of these could be your plan A business at any time in the future. So you better turn them into cash pretty quickly.
All right. Well, I'm going to go back to your Rubik's Cube when we get back into the full discussion. If Ravi and Andrea don't cover off, I'd love to get into the core versus edge discussion as well. So maybe we'll leave that for a little bit. Back to you, Andrea.
So that was fascinating. I took notes on all of that. The arthritic factory, smarter Titanic. These are all really very, very inspiring images. So we'll come back to some of those. I'd like to welcome Ravi Mulugu, who is with UL Ventures. And he's an experienced venture capitalist, corporate strategist, board director with detailed knowledge of all facets of venture investment and operations, from deal sourcing and due diligence to portfolio company management and exit strategies. He has deep domain expertise in enterprise software, cybersecurity, machine learning, and a strong analytical, data mining, market research, financial modeling, and strategy development skills. And we would say that he's extremely well regarded. And the way that we learned about Ravi was through a network and community that we have, both in Silicon Valley and globally, around who are the rising stars. So Ravi, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And okay, so we've got a list of topics, but I really think if you're like me, you've been listening and have some things to respond to right away. So as a person who's got a lot of experience in this, let's just go away from the list and go right into the conversation. What are some thoughts and themes that you'd like to respond to from what we've heard so far from Abhijit and Aid?
No, I think corporate venture capital is a mainstream activity nowadays. It's like Abhijit mentioned, it's an important tool in the toolkit of corporate innovation. And even if you look at the large technology giants that we all respect and admire, companies such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all have venture units. They're not saying, oh, we know the future, we are going to build it in-house. So then it begs the question, why isn't every company thinking about bringing outside innovation in? So I think ventures will continue to become mainstream activity. Today, we have corporate investors participating in about 25% of all venture deals, and I see that number going up. And startups also understand the value that corporate investors bring to the table. They bring access to end customers, entry into new markets, and they're a little bit more patient as well. You know, in some areas, it's not always like enterprise software, which take off very quickly. For example, mobility, as Abhijit is working in, to get to start off production, it's 5 years away, and the startup is working on with different teams in the automotive industry and slowly getting there.
So I've been through a lot of the trend du jour in terms of this whole topic. I remember moving to Silicon Valley in the beginning because I was running a software company that was trying to commercialize innovation within large companies using lean startup. And there were a lot of naysayers saying that is a ridiculous idea. Lean startup doesn't belong anywhere within the four walls of a corporation. And the jury is out as far as whether that was or wasn't a good idea. Accelerators, to get back to what Sean said, core versus edge, accelerators, startups, corporate, a lot of R&D divisions have been kind of taken apart. You know, what are some of the trends that you actually think are highly relevant from your vantage point for corporate venture?
Yeah, so I think one of the important questions, you also have it on the slide here, is the fifth one, you know, balance between core and edge initiatives. This is a question that always surfaces up at every year strategy discussion. What are we doing this year? How have we done last year? And where should we rebalance or refocus? So when you ask someone what it means to be core focused, it's very easy to answer. You know, core is whatever the parent company is currently doing. So when you say invest in the core, you're basically talking about strengthening the current offerings, gaining market share, increasing customer satisfaction, and so on. But when you ask people, what does edge mean to you? Now, the response varies hugely. So to some people, it could be 2 to 3 years out. For some others, it is 10 plus years out. And for a few others, it is moonshot projects. So the definition of edge is highly dependent on the industry vertical in which the company is operating in. For example, if you are a consumer products company, you need to stay very close to the market and you need to track voice of the customer because their preferences are changing on an annual basis every year, right? Whereas when it comes to B2B or enterprise sales, you have a little bit of a breather room there because technology is changing every 2 to 3 years, so you can strategize. And then if your parent company is serving conservative customers in highly regulated industries such as healthcare, then the pace of adoption of the end customers is slower. So it doesn't matter if you go and out innovate your end customer, they are not going to buy unless you're trying to get into newer verticals. So edge definition is highly dependent on where you're currently operating and how you want to grow. So I think that's very important because when people talk about, I want to invest in the next generation AI and all of that, or blockchain, they need to put that in perspective of what is the pain point that they want to solve and how is it done today. You know, go through all that framework that you mentioned. One is the lean startup model, or you could use a business model canvas or design sprints. But basically, a lot of when business units and business leaders bring new ideas to the ventures team or the innovation unit, they don't put all of the information together. And that's one of my recommendations for every corporation innovation unit is you should always create 2 frameworks. One framework to articulate the problem, the pain point, extract all of the information from the business leaders and put them on a page so that you can objectively talk about why do you need this and how much revenue or cost savings potential you're thinking about generating. And from then on, you can then strategize whether it is better to build it in-house or partner with a company or invest or then buy a company, right? That needs to be done first. Then once you determine that, then you can bring the appropriate tool. Should you then should you go into the market and screen companies, or work with accelerators, or work with incubators? So the second framework that an innovation unit should create is, how do we screen startups? How do we evaluate them and score them on the same attributes, so that you are having a good comparison between companies, and then you can take the appropriate action. So
so it's really interesting, because there's about 5 questions I'd like to do as follow-up. I knew that we would run out of time before we ran out of topics today. So, but let me ask the question about core and edge from another perspective. So there's a kind of building upon what you know mindset, and then there's this notion that edge is sort of out there somewhere. Everybody uses buzzwords first, right? So blockchain or something. It's like, should we look into this? So not only is it sort of H1, H2, H3, which we sometimes rail against, because it's always easy to defund a moonshot, because it always seems like, I don't know, flying cars or some science fiction. But it also means that you can easily, if you're not looking edge, or if you're not allowing people really from outside even your mindset, outside of your industry, to inform inside of your 4 walls, you could easily miss something. I thought it was interesting what Abhijit said about mobility. I mean, people who know assembly lines and engines might not understand the completely different dimensions of what a customer might be looking for in an AV or an EV world. And so, you might not be looking for LiDAR specialty, or for, whatever it is, because it's just not something that even is on your radar. So what about edge from, like, what do you read? What do you expose yourself to in terms of knowledge to make sure that your signals from outside are embracing this edge? What edge are you looking at personally?
Yeah, the other way I will always bring this point up and make it easy to understand is, let's say I have invested in 10 companies and I have a hypothetical portfolio where I have 10 startups. And let's say all of them are having good, successful collaborations with my business units. One is having a partnership, one is having commercial relationship, another one is having joint go-to-market. So it's fantastic, right? You can say, wow, your portfolio is really healthy. But it begs the question, well, you're serving the short-term needs of the parent company, seems to be doing very well. What about the long-term? So you missed the boat on that one. If all of your portfolio is very closely attached to the businesses, then it's a problem. On the other extreme, if you have 10 companies, none of them are working with your parent because they are all Horizon 3, very far out into the future, then you got another problem. You're not meeting the corporate objectives. So the balance is somewhere in between. You need to rebalance every year, like I said, discuss, and it's not a general rule that you need to be at this point by this timeline. It's depending on market by market. Some markets move very fast, or some technology spaces move very fast. So then you need to be proactive and go and invest. Right? Some probably have come down the Gartner hype curve and they are more mature. Then you take a different strategy for that. So it's on a topic and sector by sector basis.
So interestingly, once again, there's so many things to talk about, but I wonder if you would mind sharing a success story to get the next circle going. A success story, give us an example. You don't have to say anything proprietary, obviously.
Sure. I can give an example which ties in a lot of things that I mentioned here. One of the areas I focus when investing is cybersecurity. UL offers PCI compliance services, IoT security ratings, and security advisory services to customers in different verticals. So if you look at the cybersecurity landscape, it's a very crowded space. There are hundreds of companies. Each one claims to be better at protecting and detecting the next threat. And it's very hard to differentiate and identify a clear winner just by reading their product or taking a demo. So what we decided to do in this scenario, in this situation is we said, well, let's create a sandbox. Let's have the security business upload a piece of software or an application into the sandbox. And we will curate a handful of companies, security companies that we think are relevant, and then ask them to analyze the application and produce the results. And in order to source as well, because one of the hotbeds for cybersecurity is Israel. So I am not in Israel, I'm in the Bay Area. So I had to work with local accelerators over there to source some companies, names of companies. And then we invited them to participate in our sandbox experiment, and they all took a shot at it and produced the results. But doing that exercise, it has tremendous benefits. Two key benefits was one, the business was able to see, oh, these are all the different ways in which to solve the problem. And now they can better understand the strengths and weaknesses of one versus the other. And for me on the ventures team, it was insightful because now I know which vendor has a more defensible technology and the right go-to-market strategy. So then I know from an investment standpoint who to back, So I think this kind of an approach is important. You don't directly go and invest in a company based off of your thesis or tracking the space for some time. I think for some spaces, you need to do this sandbox experiments before either you invest big dollars in or announce a big partnership agreement, because there are so many things that change. So that is one success story I can tell.
That's a great one. So I'll go to Abhijit and for another success story, just something that has worked well.
So one of our, however you call it, edge or moonshot projects inside Goodyear was really around the fact that when our customers kept telling us that they would like solutions around helping them with uptime, our trucking customers who bought tires from us kept telling us that downtime was an issue. So we kind of identified that as a product condition monitoring service opportunity, and we kind of incubated and partnered with others, external startups. In one instance, it led to us actually acquiring the startup because there was such a strong strategic fit. And we actually put out a services business very consciously with, in certain instances in Europe, with a separate sales force that was selling the services in conjunction with our existing core business. So I look at that as kind of having multiple components. We got a signal from an external source about an opportunity. We realized it's not a product-oriented opportunity, it's a solutions-oriented opportunity, which was different from the core business models that we operate with. We recognized that we need to organize differently for it. And we partnered with external parties, including a ventures play and an M&A play. And we ended up launching that business in the market. So it kind of, I look back at that, partially because I was in the project team, so I have a bias, forgive me for that. But I look back on it fondly because it's a case where we took the company consciously down a path that created more value for our customers. And that was phenomenal. And we adopted a business model that was very different from the ones that we were traditionally used to.
That's a great example. That's a really great one.
Example of what I can think of. I do have one thought in terms of framing things at edge versus core. I think that framing, to me, that framing has an issue because if you think about something that you are investing in to learn about, it has to be relevant for the corporation. So defining it as an edge might create some wrong signals. In my view, we need to manage the present, manage the core, and improve it. And at the same time, define what are strategic priorities for the future, and invest along in those lines. Somehow we have to be careful about how we frame it, because framing it as core versus edge kind of signals that maybe that's not so important, it's on the edge. But really, it is important, it's vital that we experiment around those areas, because they will be relevant 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
That's a really great, I mean, it's sort of like why we rail against H123, because time horizons can seem like they never show up. That's actually really helpful in terms of your response. So I'm going to go to Aid, and then in a minute, I'll ask Sean to do the round the horn. So I would love to hear one of any of these, is there, because we're running to the short answer moment. Is there a company that you admire who's in this world and doing it well? I would love to hear that from you, Aid.
Sure. Funnily enough, work that I've been doing in the Middle East and the public sector, where they're looking to make the public sector, the government, more like an entrepreneurial outfit. In the course of that work, we came across a Chinese company called Haier, which is a manufacturing company that used to make very poor fridges. And after symbolically smashing them with hammers in the car park, they created essentially a tribe of tribes. They created they turned themselves into, in effect, an incubator, and they had these enterprise units where there was groups of employees that were dealing directly with specific customers, and the good fortunes of the employees was totally based on the good fortunes of the customer. So a very, very direct correlation between the well-being. You don't normally see the well-being of the customer make its way right through the organization. Well, they've managed to do that there. So they've been doing in terms of experiments, a lot of their experiments are internal. They have their own capital organization, and they've invested in things in their own space, kind of consumer white goods and so on, but also in sort of biotech and even zoos. So they're going right to the edge in terms of what they're getting into. But the amazing thing about this organization is that they are, whilst ostensibly private sector, they are public sector, as in owned by the government, so to speak. But fascinating, and management consultant Gary Hamill raves about them. So one should keep an eye on them.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean to do the round the horn. Do you want it with a slide or without a slide, Sean?
We can do it without a slide. I think
right.
we're on a roll here. And I will mention just 4 things that have come in through the chat that may or may not enter into your answers here in terms of what we've learned today. I've caught a question from Frode about decentralization. You've seen it in blockchain. You've seen it in the future of work. We're all decentralizing. How does a corporate business portfolio play with decentralization? I think Revi had a question on corporate purpose and how purpose plays a role in establishing portfolios. And I think just recently, we just got a question in about the role of leadership and how they can set business context through portfolios and do ecosystems, and the attachment to ecosystems and adjacency play a role in how to set those up. So they may enter in some of your language here, guys, but we kind of do like the Gestalt kind of what did we learn at the end of our discussions toward these, and you might have heard something from somebody that kind of just you wrote down or something. So maybe Ravi, maybe we'll start with you. Like we've had a good 50-minute discussions now on portfolio. Any things that come to mind in terms of just key threads or themes that have come out of our discussion?
I think I like the point Aid mentioned last, the organization that was tracking customer success and tying it to employee well-being. I think that's a good model. It's very hard to do because if it's a very large organization, connecting the dots and rewarding employees is hard, but I'd like to learn more about that model.
Ravi, can I do one follow-up here? Because you invest in a ton of technology. I'm going to state it very explicitly. Who wins when setting up these portfolios, people or tech?
Both.
I knew you were going to fence it on that one.
We are investing in the people that are building the tech at the end of the day. And, organized corporations are run by people as well. I think we need to put them at the center, and tech for good. Of course, autonomous vehicles, for example, they'll save a ton of time for everybody, and so they can work on more better things. So I don't know if that the angle you wanted me to take, or you wanted to draw another reference.
I was trying to be provocative. I was seeing if you're going to take one side or the other and create some some polls that we could argue against. But no, that's all well and good. Abhijit, I was going to pivot to you. You operate in the Borg of Goodyear here. You are in corporate land, and from a corporate purpose standpoint, first of all, I'd love to know what we've learned today, but also maybe address the question of how much purpose plays a role in portfolio development for you guys.
I think it is important, of course. I mean, of course, we are in the mobility space, so a lot of our purpose has to do with understanding your destination and helping you get there safely. And so, if you look at it at such a broad level, and then combine that with what I said earlier and some of the other panelists commented on with respect to what are the signals there, I think that purpose stays the same even in the emergent world and of mobility that we find ourselves in. So I think purpose definitely plays a huge role and guides us and is core to how we look at what we want to do for. So in short, it is critical. And therefore, it is important to build a purpose that is kind of looking at the business in broad landscapes and is kind of asking the business to a broad question and hopefully preparing it for the future or to answer questions that prepares it for the future. So that's kind of my take on that.
And then thoughts just in terms of what you've heard today, like any kind of things that are rumbling around your brain in terms of what we've discussed today?
Yeah, so I think it is again it's for I think all the discussion kind of reinforces the point that it is important to set up metrics related to exploration and organizations and teams that are tasked with exploring as much as it is important to set up metrics around your core business and set up teams and organizations that are going to deliver the results quarter in, quarter out. And so I think there's that kind of got reinforced from the discussion today. But if we mix the two up, or if we ask one to do both, sometimes it can be challenged, and that challenge needs to be overcome, in my view, through dedicated teams and dedicated focus on specific areas that drive corporate performance in both aspects, managing the day-to-day today, and also placing bets on the future. So that was a part that I thought got reinforced in the discussion today.
Nice. I love the practitioner mindset that we bring to the table here too, right? Like there's something you can read about, but you're living it every day. So it's good feedback. Aid, you get to play anchorman wrap up here in terms of what we've learned today. Where do you want to take us?
Okay, well, I guess the points have been raised by the audience, so to speak. Purpose is critical, but because at the very least it creates a kind of common esprit de corps amongst the workers. And certain organizations, for example, if your major business is tobacco, it's very difficult to attract the best talent to go and work in a company that's basically about killing people for profit. So purpose is key. It unites the tribe, so to speak. The decentralization piece, I think that's, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, is not such an issue. We're all decentralized now. Up until COVID, we were starting to see talent super hubs emerging in New York, London, Berlin, and so on. But that's all gone out the window now. And we've actually started to discover that we can trust people in the main to work away. So now your talent repositories do not have to be in your country. So if you're the leader of a country, you could say, well, forget all that education infrastructure. I'll just go and take them from the Philippines, and they don't even have to come here. And certain countries like UAE are saying, anyone in the world, you can come and work here, in fact, and you will not have to kind of mess about in terms of all the paperwork to get in. So actually, Abu Dhabi is going for a physical talent grab, which is the stage 2 beyond just accepting that you can get talent anywhere in the world now. So that really does change things. The world, your companies are primarily virtual with the odd physical location here and there. And that boils down to the fact that there's new asset classes emerging. So we've always had finance, we've always had physical capital, brand has been around a little bit, but cognitive capital and data capital, they're emerging asset classes. Right. And many organizations are just sitting on untapped oil wells in that respect. So there's a lot of value to be released if they can get their heads around that. And smart leaders, it's like, don't fail the Stanford marshmallow test. Don't go for profit, build assets. Not physical assets. Any physical assets, get rid of them as quick as you can, because you can't pivot very quickly if you're holding on to 30 or 40 factories and a load of machinery. Everything as a service. So drop your physical asset portfolios in terms of your own assets and go large on data and human capital. So smart leaders see their organization as an asset portfolio, and these experiments, these acquisitions, these internal startups are assets in themselves.
It's interesting how I think that's kind of consistent with our view on business models, and it's interesting how you said invest both in data and people at the same times, and perhaps the sinew between the two as well, so they play well with each other. Andrea, I'm going back to you. Thank you all for the wrap up and the round the horn. Andrea.
This is one of, we literally could do another hour. We have just begun to really uncover the truths and some of the sort of dirty little secrets, because when I think about Ravi and Abhijit, who sit in this chair every day, having to balance the opinions and preferences of many people, we didn't talk about alignment, but you might know 100% that something is the way to go in terms of a portfolio, but that doesn't mean that you've got the heart and minds and pay and support of all of your peers. So how do you bring others along? And this leadership thing is really interesting. And then Aid, I think that you win the award for really looking broadly across industries and sort of seeing from 20,000 feet, like what in the world is going on in this notion of new asset classes, and just the world has changed so much. So a lot of our vocabulary, and to Abhijit's point, like we might need to reframe it and stop saying core edge if it's rubbing people the wrong way. As I said, we rail against H3 because I've never seen anybody get to horizons that keep moving out. So I actually think this was fantastic. We really, I mean, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the beginning of this kind of conversation. So thank you to all of the panelists. And Sean and I will wrap up, but please stay on while we do this. Sean, do you want to walk us through Futureproofing Next, the book?
Well, as much as we'd love to be traveling around the world, we're just popping from country to region to country over the next 12 months. We have our Asian launch. We just launched in Europe last week, and we're launching in Asia on November 17th or 18th. I guess this is a straddling date. I plan to be sleep deprived when we end up doing this one.
And we gave a little bit of a spoiler alert by showing you a couple of the pages. The book is not a book. It's not a book. So it's partly words on one side, and on the other side is tools, because the last thing in the world we need is a book with just stories that are going to be stale the next day. So we're really trying to equip practitioners. The second thing is, Sean, would you like to talk about future-proofing you?
Yeah, we're trying to lift off whatever's on the pages and within our own venture to turn this into something that becomes tangible for people that want to learn more about this. So we've invented Future-Proofing You with one of our partners, Chen-Yang Wu, who is a legend both in European, Asian, and Silicon Valley circles. And we're pulling together a beta version of this on December 10th. So if you're interested, certainly give us a chat in terms of being involved in some of the early work. Andrea has allowed me, I'm a bit of a sportaholic. Andrea admittedly is more casual a fan. So our next webcast is all about how we lead sports, how we fan sports, and how we play sports in the future. And so we're planning on doing a triple header of webcasts on November 10th. So please join us if you like sports like I do and love the marriage of technology.
And so I'll wrap us up with the fact that we are a community. We learned about a year ago when we were starting to work through the book, that the last thing in the world we wanted was to be those lonely authors sitting in a room somewhere. So we're practitioners by nature. We're still working with corporations all the time. And we decided that what was missing was a place for all of us to get together. We call them now learning communities. Every time I think I know something I haven't experienced, like meeting this morning with Abhijit and Ravi and Aid, and going, wow, everybody has such important lenses that it's so hard to drink from the fire hose and really understand how to stay ahead. I also loved what the panel said today about signals. Where do you find signals? I mean, no matter what I'm reading, somebody forwards something to me. I'm a big fan this week of Pascal Copins, who helps me with China, like what's happening from a perspective. And you can never know enough. And for our Asian launch, we're doing deep dives into what's happening in Kuala Lumpur and other places where it's just hard to see. So we have a network, and we're hoping that you will join us. We're calling it Futureproofing 66, which is a United States highway in addition to other things. And what we're looking at is we're really trying to get people like us together to once a month at least, look at all the signals, make some decisions about what's happening. Core and edge, I thought that was really interesting. Stop saying that, please. It's not sitting well. Or here's how I got leadership aligned. So rolling up our sleeves and being practical, but also people who are really advanced practitioners as well. And so we have these salons, which we love, which is, hey, we'd love to come to Tokyo. How about if you set up a salon of 25 of your best friends and we'll facilitate a conversation like this? And everything's virtual for the next few months. We have Future-Proofing Awards that are coming up, and we need a lot of scouts to help us understand what's going on in nooks and crannies that we might not be aware of. And training, so that we, just like we were saying, Future-Proofing You, we want to learn fast and share fast. So we are very excited. We would love for you to, and I have to read it for the podcast people, it's futureproofingnext.com/futureproofing66 if you'd like to join our merry band, and futureproofingnext.com FN book get involved for people that would like to help us bring the book to a larger market. So this was an amazing conversation. I really want to thank Abhijit Ganguly and Aid McCormick and Ravi Mulugu to be able to bring some new insights around the notion of triaging healthy corporate portfolios. And with that, we will see you in the future. Thank you very much for being part of it.